their way back to truth, healing, and purpose. This month, we've been celebrating writers, not just the ones with published books, but those who use the written word as a path to clarity, to healing, and reclamation. Today's guest is Lisa Nicholson, and she is one of those very powerful voices. A longtime acupuncturist, endurance athlete, and breast cancer survivor, Lisa's journey has taken her from corporate burnout to biking 1,200 kilometers across France and later to navigating sepsis and chemo with grit, grace, and unconventional approach to healing. Lisa didn't just survive cancer, she wrote her way through it, and now she helps others do the same, offering tools for emotional resilience through journaling and self expression. If you've ever wondered how writing can become a lifeline during life's most uncertain moments, you're going to want to listen all the way through. And all of us, let's welcome Lisa to Flying Upstream. I am so excited to have a chat with you today.
Hi, Louisa. I am super excited to be here. So thank you.
Of course. Let's start at the beginning. So, your story is one of strength, grit, and incredible reinvention. Can you take us back to the moment when you sort of realized that your life needed a change, whether it was in the corporate burnout stage or the cancer diagnosis? How did that come about? What did that look like for you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I've reinvented my life a couple of times. It seems to be seems to be maybe a theme. And the first time that pops out, I was working as a vocational rehab counselor in upstate New York, and I had reached a point where I could not, in good conscience, continue to stay with the company that I was at. There were some things going on that were really, really not sitting well with me. And I had always looked at the first career, so to speak, as a stepping stone. It was like a regroup from college before figuring out exactly what I wanted to do with my life. And I'd been thinking about acupuncture school for a number of years and hadn't quite gotten around to pulling the plug. And I had a day where I literally came home from work, rewrote my resume, handed it off to like five different headhunters, and then picked up a pile of 50 catalogs that was on my floor and started flipping through them and said, well, why the heck am I waiting a year? And between that day and when I packed up and did a 3,000-mile move and went back to graduate school for round two was less than 6 months. So it happened really, really fast. And it almost felt like there was a little bit of, for lack of a better way of putting it, kind of a divine intervention or a this is my purpose and the path is opening up before me. And yeah, it's scary, but I don't care. I need to do this. And I just plowed forwards and did it and left the corporate car and the 401k and the job and the family and the boyfriend and everything in upstate New York and moved to San Diego and went to acupuncture school.
Wow.
So that was the first reinvention.
I love that. I love that. What about the second one? What did that look like?
So the second one was really after going through cancer. So we're fast forwarding. I guess cancer was kind of the turning point on there. So we're fast forwarding about 20 years from 1995 when I did that first move to 2017 when I was diagnosed. And in between, I've been kind of a serial athlete. I went through a backpacking all over upstate New York phase. I was a competitive swimmer in undergrad. I started rock climbing with great enthusiasm while I was in acupuncture school. And then, when the last of my favorite partners packed up and relocated, rather than trusting my life to a whole other group of people, I dusted off an old bike and started riding. And one thing led to another, led to another. And I had about an 8 year run of pretty intense cycling that went well into the ultra endurance world. And and then I went through menopause in the middle of that, which made performance really interesting. And there are a lot of people now talking about athletic performance and changes during menopause and all of the challenges of going through that, and how so much of the advice that's out there for that transition is geared towards men, and we're not small men. We have different needs and different physiology. In the midst of all of that, I get diagnosed with breast cancer. And my acupuncture practice to that point had been a lot of sports medicine and a little bit of women's healthcare in the context of a general practice. And when I was going through my own treatment, I found it astonishingly difficult to find support services for myself. It's one of those things you think, oh, I'm going through cancer treatment. Well, I want a massage therapist. I want lymphatic drainage. I want this. I want that. And then you go looking for it. And where are the people? I actually had a couple of people tell me they weren't comfortable working with cancer patients. I had a chiropractor who put in the chart that I had fragile bones because I was going through chemo. It's like, no, I could show you my DEXA scan. My bones aren't fragile. And so, where I ended up going with this is finding that there was this massive gap in services between the not the the standard medical system and the way things are done. We get a diagnosis, we go through all of this process, we have a treatment plan. Maybe it's chemo, maybe it's radiation, maybe it's surgery. For me, it was all of the above. But what do you do to support yourself when you're going through all of that? And nobody's talking about that. What do you do when the treatment is over and you're basically taken down to nothing in a fitness space because you haven't been able to do anything, and you want to rebuild and you don't really know how, and you're in a new body that doesn't work the way the previous body worked, and there's no guidance. And so, what I've done over the last 8 years with my career is started to shift gears into working more and more with breast cancer patients. I started a support group and started getting a handle on who else is facing these questions and what are they dealing with. And I started offering my services and as an acupuncturist to all of the cancer facilities in the area, and said, hey, if you've got patients who are looking for somebody to step in and provide supportive care, pick me, pick me, pick me. And if only it were that easy and referrals started flowing in, but that's a whole other discussion. you know but there were certain patterns of issues that kept showing up over and over again in my practice, and so I started doing deep dives into medical literature and figuring out how to solve those problems for people, and built a couple of online classes and have taken it from there. So now here we are in 2025, and my acupuncture practice is somewhere in the 30 to 40% breast cancer patients. And I've kind of feel like at this point in my region, I'm a one person stop for, you need this, I know where to send you. You need that, I know where to send you. You want this support, yeah, I can offer that. You need this, oh, I know somebody over here who can do that. And it's really kind of reignited my passion for the medicine that I've been doing, to have that much of a why to make this journey a little bit easier for people who come after me that are looking for services I had trouble accessing.
And I love that because we're all about, like, flying upstream is all about the unconventional. And I have spent the majority of my corporate career in disability services in one capacity or another. And as I read through medical records, one of the things that has always, always, always really bothered me, despite not being the patient or the person going through it, just as the person reading it, has been how they will go, the patients will go to one doctor, cancer patients, And then they end up leaving there with like 500 different referrals. And not only do they not know what everything is about, like who they're going to see for what, but they feel uncomfortable throughout the whole process because I hear that when I get on the phone with them and have these conversations. And it sounds like what you have done has been kind of become a resource, kind of like that center where a patient can come and you can tell them, if you need this, go here, go that. So not only is that in my own experience closing the gap for, you know, like I mentioned, all those referrals where they're like, I don't even know why I'm going to see that doctor. It sounds like they already have an understanding with you from that perspective. And also they're getting it all from one place versus this doctor sends them to that doctor who sends them to that doctor, to that doctor, to that doctor. I can only imagine, and based on reading and listening to people's experiences who had cancer, how annoying that must be because you're already not feeling great. The last thing I need is to try to figure out what I'm doing next and going to all these different doctors to only tell me to go to another doctor. It sounds like your one-stop shop has kind of solved a lot of the issues that I personally have seen and experienced in the traditional healthcare system in this country. Do you feel like you kind of get a little bit of that from the patients that you have now, a little bit of relief?
Oh, I definitely feel like I get relief, but I want to back up a little bit because a couple of things you said just kind of hit interestingly. Sometimes in the cancer world, all of those appointments are really needed, but what's not really happening well is the explanation of why we need to see all of these specialists. And people walk away with a diagnosis and a pathology report and a bunch of labs they don't understand, and a lot of big scary words that mean one thing in medicine and mean something else when you're reading a newspaper or a novel. And some of those meanings in outside of medical world are a lot scarier than they are in the medical world, and there's nobody that's really explaining all of these things. So when I get a patient who's early in the breast cancer process, I have them bring in all of their labs and pathology reports. And we just sit down and go through everything and I answer all of their questions. And then we come up with a list of questions for them to hand off to their medical team, because sometimes it really needs clarity, or sometimes I'm not the right person to be explaining the nuances of what's the difference between stage 2B and stage 3A, and how does that drive treatment in an evidence-based system? There could be three different potential treatment plans there. That's up to their oncologist to decide. But is there coordination between the medical oncologist and the radiation oncologist and the surgeon and the plastic surgeon? And is anybody addressing what's going on with this patient who is suddenly thrown into a whole new world and is anxious and maybe was borderline for depression before they walked in, and now all of a sudden they're at home at night and sitting in their living room scared out of their wits, and they don't know how to even manage those feelings, and nobody's talking. Well, gosh, maybe a psych referral is appropriate, and having a place to talk in a safe place about all these things that are coming up for you. Yeah, and I begged for a psych referral, and it took almost 3 months before, from the point of diagnosis to the point where that came through. And it took me completely losing it in a doctor's appointment, for a lot of reasons, where a nurse walked up and just put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Oh, honey, do you think maybe talking to somebody in psych would be helpful?" And I can tell you that in that moment, it took every ounce of restraint that I had to not smack that person, because it was like, how many times do I have to ask for this? And it comes to this. Yeah, this is crazy. So I really do what I can in my ecosystem to make sure that the people that I'm working with do not hit that point of frustration with their providers and are educated enough to go into their doctors with really good questions. And when they go into each appointment, they understand where it fits in the big picture and why they're going to that doctor. You know, and that's not even, and that's before we even pick up an acupuncture needle. You know,
Yeah.
it's a whole other piece, you know, and it I think because I was a case manager, there's that part of my brain that still works that way. I can't help it but do coordination of care. It's kind of in my bones from my previous work.
And I'm glad that you took that point and clarified it because I didn't have the words, but that is exactly what it is. It's this like lack of education and knowledge and awareness of why I'm going to all these doctors and why I'm going to all these specialists and names and terms that we've never heard before, which can be very overwhelming, like you mentioned. So I love that. It is that coordination and it is that, understanding the education of why, because our system, our healthcare system, is focused on, providing care to one capacity or another. And it's not focused on education, but it feels like it needs to be a part of it. And I love that that's part of the business that you've built and part of what you provide your patients before even picking up that acupuncture needle. Let's talk a little bit about your work specifically. So after you get them all situated and you get them all kind of understanding and with a good list of questions to ask their providers, um, what happens next with you? What do they do? Because I've not heard cancer and acupuncture in the same sentence before, so I'm very intrigued.
So you know what we're doing with with all of the education is part of the intake process. And in the course of that, I'm getting their medical history, what was going on in their lives before they got their diagnosis and before they got to this point where they're needing treatment. How are they sleeping? How are they digesting? How are they feeling? What was going on in their lives when all of this interrupted their lives? What are the things that are bugging you the most right now? Is it anxiety? Is it pain? Is it are you halfway through chemo and you're experiencing neuropathy, or you're nauseated, or you're coming out of surgery and you're still having more pain than we might expect you to have? And is it normal? Is it not normal? And can we do something besides narcotics to manage that pain? So once I have a picture of what is going on with that patient and what their primary pain points are, then we do a treatment plan that basically, if I have my way, I'm seeing somebody at least once a week as they're going through treatment. It's not always realistic because the sheer volume of appointments that somebody who's going through cancer treatment has is massive. And I am very acutely aware of hitting that point of going, I've had 5 medical appointments this week, and I know my acupuncturist would be an amazing thing for me right now. But if I have to walk into one more office, even if it's good for me, I'm just going to lose it. And I know people get to that point. So the other side to it is, okay, if you can't come in once a week, that's fine. I'll meet you where you are and let's see what does work for you. Maybe let's put you on the schedule every other week. And if you're feeling like you need something sooner, you call me and I'll figure out how to get you into the schedule. And, the things that we're addressing are not the cancer. As an acupuncturist, I am not allowed to treat cancer, and that's okay. I don't need to treat the cancer. Western medicine's doing a great job of treating the cancer. But I'm seeing a patient who's exhausted from their treatment, whose nervous system is generally right at the edge of what it can handle, who may or may not be experiencing digestive problems, sleep disturbances, tingling in their fingers and toes, pain, weakness, et cetera, et cetera. And I can address all of those things as an acupuncturist. Yeah, whether I'm treating nausea from first trimester pregnancy or nausea from chemo, I'm still treating nausea, and I'm still treating the patient in front of me with what they're presenting with.
Love that. I love that so much. And The best part of this, which of course I'm sure did not feel this way as you were going through this, is that having gone through it, you have a very, very clear understanding of what they're experiencing versus I feel like if I were to walk in the room from just reading medical records about a cancer patient, it's not the same. I'm kind of I'm unable to empathize fully because I haven't felt the emotions and I haven't
Mhm.
been in their shoes to be able to have the patience, I think, that is probably required.
Yeah, and I think that's true of 8 out of 10 medical professionals that somebody sees. You know, there are medical oncologists out there that have been cancer patients, but the numbers are relatively small. So the likelihood of a given patient landing with that doctor who's been there is pretty small. I mean, to be honest, yeah, there's I can think of a handful of other acupuncturists off the top of my head that have been through breast cancer treatment, and some of them are also working in oncology. You know, I think it goes one of two ways. You know, you go through this kind of experience and you either never want to think about it again and you run the other way and throw yourself into a different area of medicine, or you go, oh, this was not okay the way things played out and I need to make this better for other people. And I fell into the latter camp, but I also know people who have just like, no, I can't deal with that. It's too much of my own trauma that comes up with my patients.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I could totally understand that. I have one last question before we jump into kind of want to talk a little bit about your athleticism and kind of like that whole world. But before we do, I have one question about journaling. How did journaling become or play a part in your cancer journey? And does it play a part in the work that you do with your patients today?
Oh, absolutely. Journaling was one of my anchors to sanity as I was going through this, you know, and to be fair, I am a writer. I'm a natural writer, and I have been journaling on and off, not continuously, but at big transition points in my life, or points where I'm feeling like I'm in over my head. The feelings are too big. I've used my journal as a way of sorting through that for pretty much my entire life. And so there were nights, you know, if my husband were sitting behind me, he'd be kind of smiling and nodding about this, but there were nights where I would wake up at 2 in the morning and there was just no going back to sleep. Yeah, the combination of feelings that come up when you're going through this is overwhelming and big and not necessarily what you expect. Like you kind of expect fear and anger.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that really caught me off guard that ended up being a primary feeling, and I think I found this through my journal, was the grief. There was so much sadness and so much grief. And I processed all of that. I mean, yes, I did eventually see a therapist as well, but as I was working my way up to that, all of that got processed through my journal. And my husband would come out of into the living room and find me like on the floor in my pajamas with a candle, a flat box of tissues, a journal, and a pen. And like I'd go through a whole box of tissues in like 50 pages in a night, just trying to process stuff, you know. And every once in a while, I would actually make him put shoes on and drag him out and walk the neighborhood at 4 o'clock in the morning because I needed to burn off energy to get some of that out of my system enough that I could rest. And the intensity is impressive. You know, and I'd been through intense things before, but this was certainly, I think this was next level intensity going
Yeah.
through that.
Yeah. I love that. I am a big journaler and meditation advocate.
Mhm.
It changed the trajectory of my life, journaling. And I was getting teary eyed as you were saying that because I can totally relate to like the box of tissues.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and the notebook and the pen. I consider myself sort of a lone wolf. I have really been most of my life, even when there are people around. And I value that you not only share that, but also that that's part of your process with your patients, because I, just like meditation, believe that the value of journaling is completely underrated. Like, there is so much value and beauty, because there is beauty in the unfolding, in my opinion. And so, thank you for sharing that, and for making that part of the work that you do, because it is invaluable. And I want to jump into, I want to jump into a little bit about, okay, you picked up a bike. I'm very intrigued in this because I have been through stuff, very intense stuff too. I don't know many people who go through breast cancer and pick up a bike and then become a hardcore athlete. Talk me through that. I don't even have questions. How'd you get there?
Well, it was actually the other direction. I was a hardcore athlete that then got diagnosed with breast cancer.
Okay.
And and it's interesting because that was another shift. I have actually done one century ride since breast cancer. And as I was going through my treatment, I was absolutely determined. I was going to get back to what I was doing. I was going to do another 600K or 1200K within like 2 years of going through this. And what I discovered is that by the time I'd gone through everything I went through, my perspectives had changed, my values had changed, how I wanted to spend my time had changed. And I really, really loved riding up to about 50 or 60 miles. And then I was just bored and cranky out there. And so I did one century, and everything that I've done since has been 50-ish, 50 to 70 is kind of the range that I trained for. And if I were really determined, I know I could get off the couch tomorrow and go ride 100 miles and I'd be sore the next day and I'd be fine. But the hardcore athlete really came prior to breast cancer. I picked up that bike, and my in-laws were really avid cyclists, and I'd kind of known that in the periphery of my world. But when I hit 35, 40 miles on my rides, my mother-in-law reached out and said, "Hey, you're riding. We need to go do Oklahoma." And I'm thinking, what do you mean do Oklahoma? And it turned out that my mother-in-law had been doing a cross-state ride every summer for years. And so she had her sights set on a ride that was going to go from the Texas border to the Kansas border, 500-ish miles over a week. And my knee-jerk reaction was, that's, insert expletive, crazy. And then my next thought was, now wait a minute. This woman's 20 years older than I am. And if she can ride a bike across a state, I can ride a bike across the state. And so I added 5 miles a week, every week to my rides. And every week, the last 5 miles kind of sucked, but I got it done. And then that distance was doable, and the next 5 miles sucked, et cetera, et cetera. And after about 3 months of doing that, I hopped on a plane and got on my mother in law's spare bike, and we rode together with about 800 other people across the state of Oklahoma. And I came back sunburnt to a crisp, exhausted, elated, and like, when do I get to do this again? And so we did another ride the following summer. And then, wow, I've done like my longest ride is 75 miles. I've got to do 100 because that's kind of the landmark. It's the marathon of cycling, is the century ride. And so I start, you talked about being a lone wolf. I was doing most of this training solo. So I was out there riding, just kept adding miles. And I had a friend on the East Coast who was working with Team in Training and training for her first century. And so we were trading stories on social media about our training rides. And I think we got our centuries done about a week apart from one another. And then somewhere in there, my father-in-law, who is ever the instigator, sent me a link to the San Diego Randonneurs organization. Randonneurs is an international organization of long distance self-supported cyclists. And in the backdrop of all of that, I wanted to get some group skills. So I joined a club that was training for a century and the following year. And everybody that I was riding with was, oh, this is so exciting. It's the longest ride I've ever done. I'm like, oh, I've already done this distance. And somebody who was hearing that was like, oh, well, there are double centuries. You should talk to this coach over here about his double century group. And one thing led to another, and I didn't end up joining his group, but I did end up signing up for the event. His group was a faster pace than I was managing, and it just sounded like I was going to be miserable, and I was going to make everybody else miserable training with them. So I just kept adding miles and so I did my first double, and then I jumped into the randos group the following year and started with a 200-kilometer ride, and I met a buddy. I'd actually met her with the double century because I had sent out an email to that group saying, hey, I've been training solo. I'm about to do this double century and I'm a little scared of doing it alone. And I'd love to have a buddy. Is anybody else doing this ride? And I had a bunch of guys responding, oh, yeah, I'll ride with you. And one woman who comes back and says, do not ride with any of those men. They are going to wipe the floor with a new rider. They're going to be way too fast for you. I am a retired PE instructor. I am coming off of a knee injury. Your pace is a little slow for me, but I will manage it and I will go with you. And we literally met for the first time in the parking lot at 4 o'clock in the morning at the start of this ride and rode 200 miles together, more or less, with a few bonus miles because of a wrong turn. And we took turns hauling each other's butts when we hit walls. And she ended up being my riding partner for several years after that. But, it just kept building. And there was
Yeah.
this sort of twisted part of me that was really curious about what is the limit. All right, I've done 200 miles. Now I've done a 200 kilometers, so 125 miles once a month for a year. And I did 5 double centuries in one of those years with the Triple Crown Award and their 1,000-mile club in California. And then one of those years I did a 200K and then a 300K and then a 400K and then a 600K, which is about 380 miles. And these are like in one chunk. It's not like you're doing San Diego to San Francisco over 8 days like some of the tours do. It was, I'm a 600K. I'm riding from Santa Cruz to Oxnard in 40 hours or less.
Oh my goodness.
And, I was averaging 38 and a half hours on something. I've done probably half a dozen of those over my life.
Wow.
First attempt at 1200K was an epic failure. I was kind of a legend at the Davis Bike Club for a couple of years after that one. But it was not a successful completion. And I mean, if you had all day, I have so many stories about those days and the experiences and how just the grit that it takes to keep going when you're so exhausted, you want to fall off the bike, but you're like, nope, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to finish this thing. I started it. I'm going to finish it. That plays right into how do I survive as a small business owner and how do I get through something like cancer,
And that's beautiful, a beautiful segue because I wanted to circle right back into that because that's what I got to thinking as we begin to wrap up. One of the things that I was thinking was, I wonder how much of that experience plays into the business that you've built and into the work that you do today and into your ability to have gotten through cancer. And let's be honest, and into running a small business, which is no small feat. I think it's really underrated how much it takes to keep going as a small business owner. What do you think kind of got you, like, what were you able to grab from that crazy. I'm going to say it. There's no other word from that sort of athleticism and that you have been able to bring over into the work that you do today and the experiences that you've had.
It's grabbing from both ends because the small business ownership predated all of that.
Yeah.
I started my business as a second year acupuncture student in 1997 when I got laid off from a job and I had enough credits to start doing massage independently and got tired of the, shall we say, walking a thin line between therapeutic massage and adult entertainment establishment I
Yeah.
had gotten my first massage job at. And so that first year, I mean, even when I first moved to California, I thought I was coming here with a job in hand. And then I reached out to the people I'd interviewed with a month previous, and that job had vaporized. And so I was out there with a typed resume because we're talking pre-computers. I like got out the typewriter and then had somebody professionally print my resume and literally went door to door handing it out to insurance companies and private rehab companies to find a job in my field. So I think some of that is just what I grew up with in a family where my father had a private practice as a dentist, but also worked for the state health department for the job security and the benefits. And this sort of, once you start something, you don't give up. If you fall flat on your face and it's simply not possible, that's one thing. But if you make a commitment, you stick with that and you keep going. And I think that's kind of carried me through, like getting through building a small business and getting that somewhat successful was part of what gave me the, yeah, I can do this with the athleticism, which was part of what gave me the, oh, if I could ride 1200K in 90 hours or less, I can darned well get through chemo. It's different challenges, but the mindset piece of it is pretty similar across all of those things. And then it's leaning into the tools. I mean, for me, meditation and motion is the thing. I've never been able to sit, but I can meditate while I'm pedaling. I can meditate while I'm stroking and doing crawl stroke in the pool. Stroke, 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 breathe is its own mantra when you do it for 20 minutes at a time. And so leaning into all of those tools that have gotten me through each of those things has kind of gotten me through all of those things.
I love that so much. What piece of advice would you have to someone who may be going through cancer and or building a small business?
Oh my goodness, so many. I think the number one thing though is to not look at the big picture all at once, but to break it into bite-sized pieces and little pieces. I spent some time as a 12-step counselor years and years and years ago in the first round of grad school. Then one of the things that I took from that training is the concept of one day at a time. And when you're really struggling, one day at a time might get broken down to 1 hour at a time, or 1 minute at a time, or 1 second at a time. So for this 20-minute period, I am only going to focus on this. And then I will decide whether it makes sense to continue with this or to move on to something else. Right now I feel nauseous. I am going to focus on not throwing up and figuring out what I can do to reduce that sensation in my body. And nothing else matters right this second. Right now I have an accounting crisis on my hands. I am going to focus on sorting out this mess for the next 20 minutes. And I will either have more clarity or I will need to figure out how to throw money at the problem and bring somebody else in that can solve it. But it's that, break it into manageable pieces. And then don't forget to be grateful for the things that are positive, because it's so easy to spin off into all of the challenges and then start feeling sorry for yourself or let it paralyze. And so, if you can pull back at those moments where it just feels like the whole world is against you and everything sucks, because there are definitely those moments, to say, all right, what am I grateful for right now? Maybe it's as simple as the sun is shining and I have running water. Or maybe there's something that's just truly amazing that you hadn't been thinking about because it had been eclipsed by everything else. And it's not toxic positivity, it's pulling back to the fact that it is a core tenet of Chinese medicine, yin and yang. Wherever there's darkness, there's always a seed of light. Wherever there's light, there's always a seed of darkness. Exactly. And so when it feels like everything is too dark, acknowledge it, but then look for the light and use that as the guide into the next phase because it will always cycle.
I love that. That is beautiful. Thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on, for sharing your knowledge, your experience. I am in awe and at the same time, absolutely grateful for the work that you do today. And for all of our listeners and viewers, all of Lisa's links, if you would like to work with her, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what she does, it is all going to be in the show notes and in the description. And if you have any questions about her work, are unsure, just reach out and start a chat, see how she's able to help, and take it from there. And Lisa, again, it's been an honor for our free spirits. If this conversation has woken up or stirred something in you, don't let it stay inside. Start with one sentence, one messy page, one breath of truth, and go from there. If you're looking for tools, refer to the show notes, reach out to the Flying Upstream team, to Lisa, and as always, remember to keep questioning, keep exploring, and of course, keep flying upstream. Until next time.